Hi, I'm Christina Kasperzak, co-director of the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. We support Part C and Section 619 coordinators in building quality systems for implementing IDEA and ultimately improve outcomes for young children with disabilities and their families. Our commitment to racial equity is embedded throughout our work, characterized by respect for all people. We provide TA opportunities at different intensity levels to match your needs. We provide individualized TA as well as national conferences, webinars, peer learning communities, and timely critical resources. The ECTA system framework helps leaders understand what a high-quality system looks like and how to assess and improve their system infrastructure.
Connecticut was part of developing the early childhood system framework, and we're still using it. We've been through a lot of infrastructure changes lately, these past 5 years in particular. Oh, there he goes again. And the framework is still really relevant. We're constantly referring back to it because of the great foundation it provides.
I am convinced that the NECTAS staff has a gift of foreseeability. They always anticipate our needs, sometimes before we recognize them. Topical meetings on marketing, project evaluation, and qualitative analysis all came at the time I was grappling with just those issues. State Early Childhood Program Coordinator.
I really looked to the Early Childhood TA Center as one of the technical assistance programs that the Department of Education provides in the area of education as a critical tool to help ensure that people are getting the information they need to be able to provide comprehensive services. And I think one of the other very important parts about the TA Center is that it very much values the role of parents.
Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Akar, and I'm an assistant professor at UMass Boston, and I'm an RP ambassador for Massachusetts. I'm a big fan of the practice improvement tools, especially the performance checklist. They are available in English and Spanish, so I can share both versions during my courses with my students. Also, other tools such as Family Practice Guide for practitioners and Family Practice Guide for families are available in both languages, again, Spanish and English. So our students during their practicum, internship, or for any other project, when they connect with the community at large, they can share these resources with their networks who prefer to use Spanish to communicate. And it's wonderful to see these resources in action.
Greetings, everyone. Kat Taminga here, joining you from Minnesota. I'm Minnesota's Part C coordinator and have been for about 2.5 years. Right from the beginning, all the way through, I have received support from ECTA to be the best Part C coordinator that I can be. All of us need support. This job is hard. It is a lot of work, and ECTA never hesitates to step in and support us in all the ways that we need.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for part 2 of our 3-part celebration of 50 years of technical assistance. I'm Betsy Ayankoya, your host for the celebration. Last week, we kicked off our anniversary celebration with a reflection on the wisdom of the past with a keynote address from former Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, Judy Heumann. All of our sessions are being recorded, so you can catch up if you were not able to attend last week. Judy reminded us that 50 years ago, there was no Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, there was no American with Disabilities Education Act, and there was no Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. You know what? In 1971, when we began, 18-year-olds got the right to vote. President Nixon was in the White House, and there was a Department of HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. The U.S. Department of Education came into existence in 1979 under President Carter. A gallon of gas was 40 cents, and a Dodge Charger cost $3,579. You know what else was happening? Disney World opened. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary too. National Public Radio began. The average cost of a house in the US was $25,000. And Switzerland granted women the right to vote. FBG was home to one of the first NIH-funded centers dedicated to research on developmental disabilities. So it was befitting that it was the home of the first TA centers to support disabilities. If you were fortunate enough to know Pat Trohannis, you would never forget him. He was one of the most brilliant men I ever met. He was kind, he was funny, he was caring. He had a laugh that was contagious. He had that nutty professor personality with a hair to match. We always knew that his mother, Miss Mary, was planning to visit when he showed up in the office with a haircut. We knew that his wedding anniversary to his Donna was Valentine's Day, and he always beamed when he talked about his daughter, Zoe. Of course, we remember his Greekness, his love for dancing, shouting "Opa," eating amazing Greek food at his Greek festivals, and we had monthly caring events. We still have caring events, but we're isolated right now because we have COVID, right? He introduced us to Cincinnati chili. If you've never heard of it, check with Professor Google. When Pat became ill, Lynn Kahn stepped in to guide our work. And after his passing, she took up official leadership for our TA project at FBG. Lynn was an exceptional leader in her own right. One of her notable contributions to the field was her work with the Early Childhood Outcome Center and the development of early childhood and family outcomes measurement system that is currently being used throughout the country. Yes, we have a lot to celebrate. And today we're going to look at what is informing our work for the present with a keynote followed by a panel discussing our current priorities and practices in technical assistance supporting IDEA. And I'm honored to introduce our speaker and panel for today. Our keynote speaker is Jani Kozlowski. Jani is a TA specialist for the ECTA Center, where she's a state contact and leads a great deal of our work around inclusion. Prior to joining us here at FPG, Jani worked for 3 other national centers, leading inclusion, supporting Head Start and child care and state professional development systems. And she previously worked for the state of North Carolina as the Program and Policy Resources Section Chief at the Division for Child Development and Early Education. She has worked for Smart Start, supported Head Start programs at the regional level, coordinated education and disability services for Migrant Head Start, and was a preschool teacher in an inclusive classroom. We're excited about her new book that's going to be released next spring entitled Every Child Can Fly, an Early Childhood Educator's Guide to Inclusion. Following our keynote, our panel for today includes Ching Lim, Rhodus Riggins Jr., Sherri Britt-Williams, and Katy McCullough. Ching serves as the co-director for the STEM Innovation for Inclusion in Early Childhood Center, also called STEMI. She also leads Script NC, which is a project that helps community college faculty to better prepare early childhood professionals to serve children with disabilities and who are from culturally and ethnically diverse families. And this week is STEMI Fest. Rhodus Riggins is a quality enhancement coordinator at the Education Improvement and Professional Development Project at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and an adjunct faculty member at Alamance Community College. He is co-founder and co-owner of Bailey, Pullis, and Riggins, LLC, a racial equity consulting firm. He's also a former member of FPG and supported the implementation of early childhood inclusion throughout the state of North Carolina. And we are really excited to welcome him back as a member of the FPG Executive Leadership Board. Sherri Britt-Williams leads the TA division at FPG and is the principal investigator and co-director of the North Carolina Early Learning Network Project. She's also a technical assistant specialist for ECTA Center, and her work focuses on developing and providing training and professional development to early childhood professionals and helping state systems implement successful and sustainable initiatives and practices using an implementation science framework. And our moderator for today is Katy McCullough. Katy is a TA specialist for the ECTA Center and DAISY. She's a member of the ECTA leadership team and principal investigator for the FPG subcontract with the Center for IDEA Fiscal Reporting. She provides technical assistance to Part C and 619 coordinators in states, supporting systems change and early intervention services, finance, and early childhood inclusion. Now, let's listen to our keynote where Jani sets the stage for our discussion about our current priorities in technical assistance. And then Katy's going to lead our panel in sharing different aspects of the focus of our work in the present.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jani. I'm so excited to be with you today and to be able to help celebrate this important milestone for Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, 50 years of TA. Wow. And many more to come, to be sure. I'd like to start with a story about a little boy, a boy who spent the first 17 months of his life here in a Ukrainian orphanage in a pretty little town called Simferopol in the Crimean Peninsula down by the Black Sea. The early months of his life were marked by deprivation, time spent mostly in a crib without his mother there to hold him. This boy is an inspiration to me because he is my child, Ricky Vadim. He is the boy who gave me the joys of motherhood, the joy of being his mother. He gave me the trials of motherhood too, yes, but many more joys. Ricky took his first steps at 17 months of age. As he tottered toward my husband and me when we first visited, his development was delayed as a result of this early deprivation. We even saw a caregiver feed him through the bars of his crib. So yes, he was shy with us at first, but he quickly warmed up. Even though Ricky took his first steps with us in the orphanage, by the time we were in the hotel in Kiev, he was running down the hallways, screaming and laughing. We had to chase after him, saying, "Shh, you wake up the other people in the hotel." Ricky's one of the reasons that I became interested in early childhood inclusion. Those months in the orphanage impacted Ricky's early development, and we know how important those early years are for young children. The deprivation had an impact that lasted through his school years. Ricky had an IFSP and then an IEP all the way to 12th grade. He dealt with attention issues, had a hard time sitting still, and struggled to focus and stay on task. We all know what that feels like, right? Staying focused is difficult for adults too. I experienced firsthand what it means to parent a child when the child care center said, "Can he stay home?" when the rest of the kids went on a field trip. Or the preschool teacher who believed that he didn't belong in her class. Or the kindergarten teacher who put his desk in a corner far away from the other children. But we fought for inclusion, and my son is the epitome of resilience. Ricky did belong, and he thrived, and he succeeded. Ricky is my why when it comes to my passion for inclusion. And you know, a parent shouldn't have to fight for inclusion. Every child deserves the opportunity to learn alongside their peers and to achieve their greatest potential. So, not only am I the parent of a child with a disability, I'm also a person with a disability and the daughter of a parent with a disability. And all of these roles have been lived in an inclusive world. Yes, our world is inclusion, for better or worse. And children with and without disabilities belong together as they learn and laugh and grow in childcare, in preschool, in elementary school, in high school, in life. Inclusion is a natural trajectory for all children. And we know from a large body of research that inclusion works. But we know that unfortunately, segregated preschool programs are the norm rather than the exception. In fact, today more than half of the preschoolers with disabilities still receive their services in segregated classrooms. This quote from Marian Wright Edelman really speaks to my heart. The sea is so wide and my boat is so small. Do you ever feel that way? It may resonate with me in particular because I'm a little person. I stand at 4'6" tall, and my metaphorical boat is indeed small. It does sometimes seem as though the sea is wide and that we have a long way to go to make early childhood inclusion the norm rather than the exception. My boat is small, but I also know that my boat is not the only boat. I have many partners in this work, including you. Together, we make a mighty fleet on behalf of children and families. Early childhood folks are a passionate bunch. We want to make things happen for children. We know that our work is critically important. I started out in this field in the most humble of roles. I started out by working as a nanny while in college. Yes, I was, wait for it, Jani the nanny. I went on to work as a preschool teacher in an inclusive classroom of very spirited 4-year-olds. I taught at the community college. I worked as a disability services coordinator for a large migrant Head Start program. I provided technical assistance for Head Start and then Smart Start here in North Carolina. And I served as an administrator for the North Carolina Division of Child Development and Early Education. I've also served as a TA provider for national projects funded by the Office of Head Start and the Office of Child Care. And now I provide technical assistance at FPG through the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. We support Part C and Part B Section 619 coordinators as they move mountains at the state level. I feel as though I have found my professional home here at FPG. FPG is a special place. About 18 years ago, my husband and I decided to move from the Midwest to North Carolina to be closer to family. It felt like the great unknown and pretty intimidating too. North Carolina has a reputation in the early childhood world, as you know, and I worried about making it in the big leagues. Would I be able to have a career in early childhood in a place where the Eckers and Itters were born? Was I enough? Somehow, I found the contact info for Pat Trohannis online and I reached out. Yes, the Pat Trohannis. Without an introduction or anything, I just called up Pat Trohannis himself. Opportunity favors the bold, y'all. I left him a voicemail and asked if he would call me back and share some ideas for professional opportunities for someone like me. The nerve, right? He called me right back. He was so kind on the phone. And Pat made me feel like North Carolina was about to get a special gift when Jani Kozlowski rolled into town. Pat valued people and he valued relationships. And this is a tradition that remains in the Trohannis Technical Assistance projects. We have a set of agreed upon TA practices, and the first key practice is all about building relationships. Relationships are at the heart of what we do. I remember how important trusting relationships were when I was in the role of providing TA to Head Start teachers, moving beyond judgment to partnership, and acknowledging that there are multiple right ways of doing things. And this holds true now with the TA supports that we provide for state leaders. They're just like everyone else. They need a trusted partner, a sounding board, a person that they can try out an idea with, knowing that they will be met with support rather than negative judgment. It's through these relationships with state leaders that we're going to be able to create a shift in our systems. Inclusion must be the vision for our state systems if it's ever going to be a reality for children and families. States are working hard to make inclusion a reality for all children. Some states are working on this with state leadership teams, and others are taking a more grassroots approach, beginning with community level discussions. The leaders that I am honored to work with are working on behalf of young children and families in creative and consequential ways. They work across sectors because they know that relationships are necessary to bring meaningful partnerships between early intervention, early childhood special education, and programs where the child would be if they didn't have a disability, like Head Start or childcare or pre-K. State leaders want to make inclusion a reality, but how do we do it? FPG leads the way there as well, with our indicators of high quality inclusion. The indicators offer key strategies and guidance for those working in early childhood environments, local programs and communities, as well as those working at the state level. The indicators provide benchmarks to track our progress over time, and states are using data from the indicators to make decisions on behalf of children and families. States are also grappling with equity in our early intervention and early childhood special education systems. I believe equity can be possible in early childhood. We're a group of people committed to social justice and fairness and being the voice for people who don't have a voice. Children aren't voters. They need us to be their voice. Do you remember that image of equity at the ballpark? It's a great visual to explain the distinction between equality and equity, and it makes a lot of sense to me. You can imagine that as a little person myself, my world is very step stool oriented. The image reminds me that equity isn't about everyone getting the same supports, because everyone does not need the same supports. Equity is about giving the just right supports. It's a way to address disparities that exist due to racism, ableism, poverty, and other barriers that are faced by many children and families. I remember a time that I was on a panel at an early childhood event. We were all seated at a table, and one by one, we were expected to go up to the podium and share some remarks. I usually can't see over the top of a podium. So in my mind, I was already trying to figure out how I might be able to take the microphone off the stand so I could stand beside the podium, but the microphone looked pretty much wrapped around the stand. I was really nervous, not about giving the remarks, but about podium management. Well, wouldn't you know it, when it came time for me to speak, I looked down and a step stool was just there. The early childhood event planner didn't even think twice about it. She just knew that that's what I needed, and she was ready with the support. She met the moment for me. In early childhood, equity is in our blood. It's our nature. And given that this is so, we have the ability to generalize to all needs and to expect inclusion and equity even when the child's needs might not be as visible. I believe in our field. I'm passionate about our field, about early childhood educators. So much so that I've created a book about inclusion that will be published next year. Every Child Can Fly, an Early Childhood Educator's Guide to Inclusion, is a book that I hope will provide strategies and solutions for educators out there who also believe that each and every child belongs and deserves inclusive programs. You know, when I think about our work, my son Ricky is my why, but the early childhood field is my how. Through educators, through communities, through partnerships, and through state level leadership, we can make inclusion happen for children and families. It's true that the sea is wide and my boat is small, but every ripple on the water that we create will turn into a wave. Thank you, FPG. And thank you, Pat Trohannis, for your value of relationships, for giving me that helping hand years ago, and for building my sense of belonging in this fabulous early childhood world. I'm forever grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jani, for sharing your story and leading with your story about your son, Ricky, and your inspiration and your why for early childhood inclusion. Your story reminds me how grateful I am for the contributions you and other parent and family members have made in the development and implementation of high-quality TA. Your voice and partnership have been invaluable to the field. Thank you. Jani also mentioned about the effective TA practices, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about those. They were developed by the Trohannis TA projects at FPG based on the wisdom of our now 50 years of experience, our ongoing collection and use of evaluation data, and the existing literature. These 9 practices help to define a collaborative, coordinated effort to facilitate change, build capacity, improve practices, and reach agreed upon outcomes in the early childhood systems that we serve. It truly does begin with trusting relationships, which are facilitated by consistent communication, collaborative partnering, differentiated support, adult learning strategies, leadership for change, system and improvement frameworks, and ongoing evaluation. We are in the process of developing indicators for these practices. Our current focus is to make sure that the practices explicitly address and reflect our value of equity, which has always been important to us and our work. We'll hear more about how these TA practices are being implemented in the work of our panelists today. I'm so excited to talk with Rhodus Riggins Jr., Ching Lim, and Sherri Britt-Williams, just a few of the notable partners in the fleet of folks working towards early childhood inclusion. They will share some of the exciting innovations they have been engaged in with state systems and communities. As they share, be listening for those effective TA practices, as I'm sure you will hear examples of them. So let's get started. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to see you all here today.
Thank you, love.
Ching, I'd love to start with you, if that's okay. I wonder if you could tell us about innovations in TA that you are currently engaged in. What can you tell us?
Yeah, thanks, Katy. And I think, I would like to first define the type of innovation we are doing at the STEM Innovation for Inclusion in Early Education Center. So what we are doing is disruptive innovation work, and I think that sounds really scary. So Clayton Christensen and his colleagues have described that as really a positive force and defined disruptive innovation as the process by which an innovation transforms a market whose services and products are complicated and expensive into one where simplicity, convenience, accessibility, and affordability characterize the industry. And so what this looks like for STEMI is that we want to be transforming early STEM experiences so that they are accessible for all. So currently, STEM opportunities are only provided to some children. Children with disabilities are often denied opportunities to participate in STEM experiences. And what we know is ableism is one of the biggest barriers, and as well as adults' own fear about their lack of STEM knowledge. So through our knowledge development, as well as TA work, we are building awareness that right from infancy, children have a sense of wonder and curiosity for the world around them. And all children are capable of engaging in STEM opportunities. There's just so much potential to use STEM opportunities as a vehicle to promote inclusion. And it could be a way to support children in reaching their IFSP or IEP goals, be it a language goal, social emotional goal, or a fine or gross motor goal. So I think, really the innovation that we are doing at STEMI is not really rocket science. Our work is really to build the knowledge on inclusive STEM learning alongside with our practitioners, families, and others, because the literature is so scant. And then to support the families and the adults and children's lives to just reframe their lens so that they can have high expectations of themselves and also of the children. and for them to know that STEM experiences are possible with adaptations to the environment, materials, or instruction, and to support them in gaining those pedagogical knowledge and to see the possibilities for STEM in everyday routines and activities. And to know that always to start where the child is in terms of their thinking, interest, as well as strengths.
Thanks, Ching. I love that connection to inclusion and it being so embedded in your work with STEMI. Thanks so much. Sherri, how about you? Can you share some current innovations you're engaged in?
Sure. Currently with the ECTA Center work and with the work on another project at FPG, the North Carolina Early Learning Network project, we're engaging system and program leaders in taking a more comprehensive look at professional development support within a framework of implementation science. So a state or program's professional development support activities shouldn't take place in a vacuum or in isolation. We know that in order for practice implementation and practice change to occur, systems have to set up structures to support that implementation. So for example, the TA support that we're providing to the North Carolina Early Learning Network project is focused on building leadership capacity to develop essential statewide support structures that are in place so that practices can be implemented to improve outcomes for children and families in North Carolina. And these same statewide support structures can also support a comprehensive, systematic, and cyclical process for providing statewide professional development support. So with the essential structures in place, a state like North Carolina supports communication and buy-in, input, and implementation at every level, from state to local leadership to practitioners to families. And these structures also create a nice infrastructure for providing statewide professional development supports. So it's not just about providing a training and leaving a practitioner to figure out how to apply that information. PD support is embedded in the work of all of the essential statewide support structures. So the North Carolina Early Learning Network project is building capacity for North Carolina to provide statewide professional development support as an ongoing array of supports that happen in a cycle that includes reviewing needs assessment data and implementation data, designing training and products that other TA supports so that they're ongoing and responsive to needs and requests in the moment, and then collecting data on the PD support provided to determine impact on implementation and outcomes to continue to inform this ongoing cycle of professional development that's also embedded in every level of the state system infrastructure. So we know that by building capacity for states to understand the necessary stages of implementation and how implementation progresses over time, and how to analyze and discuss implementation and impact data, we're also helping them to set up a strong infrastructure for a more comprehensive approach to a statewide system for professional development support as well.
That seems so critical, Sherri. Thanks for highlighting that. No longer are we doing the spray and pray approach to professional development, right?
No way.
Yeah, we need to make it work and last and build that capacity.
That's right.
Thanks. Rhodus, how about you? Can you tell us about some innovations you're engaged in?
Beautiful. I'm just sitting here excited listening to Miss Ching and Miss Sherri. So I think I'll speak sort of from a systemic level for this first question in terms of some work that our racial equity consulting organization is engaged in. Mm-hmm. And then I'll talk more specifically about some of the TA innovations and practices a little later through subsequent questions related to our project at Equipped, as well as UNCG. But just to think about this whole concept of equity, our racial equity consulting organization has been honored to engage with the North Carolina Infant Toddler Program to really begin to roll out their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. As part of that initiative, we are currently engaged in assessing individuals' readiness for equity. That is such an important component that may often get overlooked in our racial equity work, as well as our racial equity efforts, assessing readiness for equity. So we're just applauding that the state level organization responsible for providing early intervention services to a variety of children and families are really stepping up to really take a critical look at their organizational practices, their policies that perhaps may express commitment to equity or in some instances may not. Taking a critical look at tenets of service-based equity in terms of who is receiving early intervention services and who is not. In addition, taking a critical look at the service providers themselves, who is providing the services and who is not providing the services. So we are currently using the Coalition of Communities of Color, the tool for organizational self-assessment related to racial equity, to drive this work. So from this work, we'll be inviting early intervention partners, as well as service providers, as well as early intervention staff, to critically assess their readiness to engage in racial equity work so that we're approaching racial equity from common language, common conversations, as well as common commitments to truly change practices at both the personal and professional level, as well as policies, and as well as to improve and address some of these inequities that we know exist in early intervention services in terms of accessibility, in terms of screenings, in terms of evaluation, and even in terms of provision of early intervention services. So from that work, we are just excited to see the changes that may result, the lived experiences that may be lifted, and how we have this opportunity to truly impact the lived experiences of our children and families who are engaging in early intervention services. So that's one innovation from our racial equity consultant organization that I am thrilled to highlight and lift as part of our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, Rhodus. That seemed like more than one, but I love how you wove them together. And readiness and internal work is so critical to the work of equity, right? Instead of us just jumping right in and seeing what we can do with our clients, we have to reflect and work on that inner work within our organizations.
And be honest.
Yes.
With where we are and how we're being.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's move into our second question, if that's okay. Sherri, I'm wondering if we can start with you. I'd love to hear from each of you about what your current priorities are in your delivery of TA and how any learnings or takeaways from the pandemic over the past year and a half have informed either those priorities or your work more generally.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate what Rhodus just mentioned, what he was just discussing about his work with equity, because our current TA priorities at FPG are very much centered on promoting and providing equitable experiences in early childhood. And so just one example of our priority of centering equity would be a cohort that the North Carolina Early Learning Network project at FPG is supporting. It's called the Early Education Equity Cohort, or the E3 cohort. This is an example of how TA support is responsive and informed by data. That E3 cohort was designed in response to feedback we received after providing a webinar series on equity in early childhood. So after the series, we heard from several participants who reached out expressing interest in wanting to have a deeper understanding of how they can support and promote equity so they can take action now to make changes within their classrooms and within their own spheres of influence. So the E3 cohort was born, and there was an application process that involved some pre-learning and reflection. The teams applying had to demonstrate a commitment to team building, family partnership, and changes to practices in their environments to promote and support equity. And the teams from across the state have developed action plans that are very specific to their classrooms and communities and the families with whom they partner. And there's so much energy and excitement about learning and taking action to advance equity in their own early childhood spaces. And so also I wanted to mention the ECTA Center is providing intensive TA support for a family outcomes cohort. And this cohort is focusing on equity and family experiences and outcomes. And the cohort's going through a similar process of self-reflection and self-assessment and action planning to implement changes that will lead to improvements in equity across family experiences and outcomes within state early intervention programs. So our TA support across projects at FPG, they're very focused on helping states and programs across the country promote and provide equitable experiences and support for children and families. And to answer your question, Katy, about what we learned from the pandemic, I think the pandemic really ended up spotlighting the array of very diverse contexts we have as groups and communities of people. So when we had to quickly shift to think of platforms and strategies to support people without being in the same room with them, it really opened our eyes to the fact that one or two formats do not fit all, and certainly do not meet the needs of all. And we were really challenged to build better relationships and partnerships within communities to come up with ways to support people that fit their unique contexts and priorities and maximize their existing strengths. And we really had to come to terms with the fact that there is no one right way. There are many different ways to support people. And we find those ways by listening to the stories and lived experiences of people in different communities. We have seen how impactful this approach can be through the pandemic. And it's something we want to continue to do beyond the pandemic. We want to spotlight and celebrate diverse contexts and identify innovative strategies for tailoring and customizing TA support that's meaningful in every context.
Thank you, Sherri. It makes it more complex, right? But allows for creativity and connection in our work, which is so exciting. Rhodus, I'm going to bring it back over to you. How about for in your work in terms of priorities and any takeaways from the pandemic so far?
Thank you, Miss Sherri and Miss Katy. Yes. So for this question, I will respond specifically from our project at Equipped at UNC Greensboro. One of the greatest lessons that we have learned throughout the pandemic, in addition to this critical need and value to really sustain our relationship, is to really examine our ever-changing dynamic in TA context. And what I mean by that is, in our project at UNCG, we are really centering our TA approaches and anchoring them in the emotional well-being of individuals. We're recognizing that the stress that the pandemic has caused for individuals, for organizations, and for even our systems. So we have this great focus. We had this great focus on centering emotional well-being at both the individual level as well as the organizational health level. And we're anchoring our TA efforts in the spirit of cultural humility. We're very conscious of how we're showing up, how we're engaging, and how we're being with others. In addition to, as when Sherri was speaking about the extension of professional development experiences, we are being extremely intentional about the content of our professional development opportunities. We are intentionally bedding content to really provide opportunities for more critical reflection, such as we're embedding content related to enhancing play skills for children with special needs, supporting dual language learners with disabilities. So where our hope is to enhance more deeper, meaningful, inclusive opportunities, as well as support professionals who with their little ones every single day. So it's anchoring our work and emotional wellness of individuals and organizations, and yet extending professional development opportunities to really provide more meaningful, inclusive experiences for children in our settings.
I love that, Rhodus. I mean, especially for our frontline workers, we know their mental health struggles, many aspects of their work have truly been challenged, but across levels of our systems, right?
Yes.
Even the people on this screen, we need these
Even
supports.
the people on this screen.
Right?
Yes,
Thank you
that's
so
the reality.
much. Yeah. Ching, how about you? Can you talk a little bit about priorities that you're having in your work and any implications from the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. And, I think what Rhodus is saying about meaningful experiences and really ensuring that young children with disabilities have those just high quality access and participation in inclusive environments. And I think, like one of our priorities that we have is really to develop this set of learning trajectories for science, technology, and engineering. So our partners at the University of Denver has really a fairly well-established set of learning trajectories for early math. And I think, like why we selected that is really because it's a child-centered approach. So that makes it a really ideal resource for all children, including those with disabilities. And learning trajectories are a very unique way to understand how much a child knows about STEM concepts and what they're thinking. And it starts with the child's thinking and where they are. And so it's very, very child-centered. And with that foundation, families as well as early childhood practitioners are then able to implement strategic opportunities intentionally into the child's routines, activities, and so on that enable them to progress towards a series of goals that help them grow in the STEM learning. So I think, earlier I said about the high expectations, and, I think this really helps frame for the adults and children's life that we need to have those high expectations and know that we can support them to get to the next level of thinking and learning. So I think, our development work has been really affected by the pandemic because so much of the co-creation work is with the children, families, as well as practitioners in center-based programs, as well as early intervention services. So I think, there are two key learnings from the pandemic for us as a center and for myself. And it's that when the pandemic has forced us to change the way we work and that we had to shift to working in a fully remote and virtual environment. And I think this is what I think Rhodus and Sherri had also, alluded to, is that the fundamentals of those effective TA practices, such as building trusting relationships, considerations for adult learning principles, those are still very much intact. And in fact, I think it's even more critical than ever. And another thing is that the pandemic has magnified the inequities in our society. Children from historically underserved communities had services and learning experiences reduced or just totally cut. And the adults in their lives who are expected to provide them with positive and those responsive learning environments and interactions continue to have unworthy wages. So we want to emerge from this pandemic not by going back to normal, but I think, going on to a better new reality for children, families, and the early childhood workforce. A reality that really centers equity and inclusion, one where families and practitioners partner effectively and where we use multiple ways to engage all learners.
It's huge, right? It's a huge thing to take on, but how can we not with what we've seen unfold before us? Yeah, thank you so much, Ching, and everyone. Okay, our third question. Are you guys ready?
We're ready.
Well, and some of you have spoken to this already, but specifically, I'd love to hear about how in your work you have collected and used data or information to inform your TA. And Rhodus, I'm wondering if you can start us off.
I would be happy to, because my comments are going to tie so nicely to what Ms. Ching just said about inequities and lived experiences, which is a term that we've heard that's been lifted into space this afternoon. So one of the central question and one of the central conversation that we're having at Equipped at UNCG is this concept of rethinking technical assistance outcomes. And what I mean by that is, if our goal is to achieve equity through our technical assistance strategies and approaches, we must be willing to step back and rethink some of our TA outcomes. And how can we shift our TA outcomes so that they're more reflective of fuller stories? Fuller stories of engagement with individuals as well as with our systems. How can we shift our TA outcomes to reflect lived experiences? In our staff meeting the last time, our dean, Dr. Dina Swanson of the Human Development and Family Studies Department, just simply reminded us that this work that we all are pouring all this energy in, we're doing it with human beings, and that there are humans behind these quantitative numbers, and there are humans behind this data. She even challenged us to even remember that even our funders are human beings. So how can we use our TA outcome and our data to really lift fuller stories and lived experiences? For many of us, that's going to require us to shift to more qualitative measures than quantitative measures and our evaluation and our data methods. But just really, how can we really change our TA outcomes to reflect those fuller lived experiences of individuals who are engaging with us and in our systems on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, in a qualitative way, probably, and quantitative, right? And looking at how to really get those full stories.
Yes.
Thanks, Rhodus. Ching, I'm going to bounce back over to you, and then we'll wind down with Sherri. What are your thoughts here? Can you share how you guys are using data and information in your work?
Yeah, definitely. And, Rhodus is definitely a tough act to follow.
Never.
Yeah, so I think, kind of to piggyback on what Rhodus has said, we use a mix of both quantitative and qualitative data and participatory data collection, such as having practitioners and families review our prototypes of our resources, such as our mealtime tip sheets, storybook conversation tip sheets, and so on. And then what we are also moving into is something called the network improvement communities, where we want to engage with families and professionals, as well as some practitioners in kind of learning more about specific inclusive STEM practices that have very scant evidence, such as working with young children with significant disabilities, as well as STEM learning for infants and toddlers. So I think, with our learning trajectories development, I think, that is really to what we have done is to try to gather information at almost every level of the system. So this includes conducting a systematic scoping review of all the available literature, then a systematic breadth and depth review of the state early learning guidelines, and engaging STEM experts in a Delphi process to come to a consensus on the goals and developmental progressions for the learning trajectories. And then within our incubators, which includes early intervention, home-based services, and early childhood programs, we are co-creating with the practitioners to know what kinds of implementation supports are needed for them, and then to also work together with them to observe how the children are thinking and learning STEM.
Yeah, we need to hear from them what their needs are, right? Instead of just coming up with our creative ideas about how best to meet those needs, what we think they are. Thank you, Chin.
We do that too well.
We have lots of good ideas.
Yes.
Sherri, how about you? Take us home here on this one.
Well, I'll just add that in addition to building capacity of states and programs to collect, analyze, and use data to inform systems building and implementation and practice improvement and change, we're also doing some reflection internally, and we're looking at data we are collecting on the TA support we provide and the impact of that support. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the North Carolina Early Learning Network at FPG is currently in the process of doing is thinking about equity as we analyze data related to the TA and other PD support that we provide. So specifically, we're interested in looking not only at the responses, information, and data we get from those who receive the TA support and provide feedback on that support, but more importantly, we're interested in learning more about who we're not hearing from and how to get that input. And so we're in the process of looking at registration data for the PD support events we offer and identifying regions or communities not represented at those events. And also we're looking at the evaluation surveys we do receive from participants to determine if we're just getting feedback from the same groups or regions, and to identify which voices are not represented in that feedback, even when they did participate in the TA support. So why didn't we hear from them? Do we need to change the way we were requesting feedback to make it more comfortable and accessible for all to provide their feedback and not just some? And also we're looking at TA logs from our TA staff and noting who is requesting support and who is not. And we're trying to determine the changes that we need to make to be more responsive to all of our potential stakeholders and clients. We have data from some, and we want to come up with strategies to get more information and data from groups that are not currently represented. So, for example, we're looking at strategies for partnering with trusted leaders and influencers within these communities and geographic regions to collaborate and make improvements in how we provide TA support. We want our TA support to be meaningful and relevant and to reflect the priorities and resources and improvements and successes within all communities or regions, especially those missing voices from communities that aren't currently consistently represented in our data.
That seems so important, Sherri, especially as we're focusing on equity. If we're not looking at who we're not hearing from, we're really missing the boat. So really impressive work there. Well, thank you all. We are wrapping it up here for this panel. I really appreciate your time and your sharing about your exciting work, your innovations, your priorities, as we continue to identify strategies to support children and families and the people in the systems who are supporting them. And so many examples of the effective TA practices in action. It's really great to see that as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before I turn it back over to Betsy, I want to take us to another video. We're going to be hearing from Larry Wexler, the director of the Research to Practice Division at OSEP, and he's going to be sharing what he believes to be the most significant contribution FPG has made to the field. So enjoy this clip, and Betsy will wrap us up at the end. Thank you again, everybody.
Hello, I'm Larry Wexler. I'm the director of the Research to Practice Division of the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP. I administer all of the discretionary grants funded under IDEA and the data for the 7 million children with disabilities. So I have twins, and they're about to be 46. When they were born, twins were not common. In fact, at the time, 50% of twins were diagnosed on the delivery table. In the maelstrom of raising, or perhaps I should say surviving 2 young children, I didn't have a lot of time for reflection on good early childhood developmental practices. I mostly tried to just stay ahead of them. Now, I have a 3-year-old grandson, Logan, and I have the time and perspective to appreciate what high quality early intervention and early childhood education can mean. Logan was 3 weeks premature and had a number of challenges at birth. He was in the NICU for nearly 3 weeks, and as a result was the recipient and beneficiary of some excellent early intervention services, and they made a difference. I'm not going to enumerate the long list of projects and accomplishments that can be ascribed to Frank Porter Graham. I'm confident that others who provide testimonials will do that. Frank Porter Graham has been receiving support from OSEP before it was OSEP. Its predecessor, the Bureau of Education for the Handicapped, was housed in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. There was no Department of Education. BEH funded projects at Frank Porter Graham 50 years ago. What I will say is that Frank Porter Graham has been on and indeed has represented from its inception the cutting edge of early childhood education and services. While individual projects have, of course, contributed to the field, what I see as FPG's greatest strength across these past 50 years is its systems thinking, its development of and support for frameworks for the delivery of early childhood education and early intervention services. This approach has made Frank Porter Graham an international beacon for high-quality services for young children with disabilities. In closing, I want to mention Pat Trahamis. There aren't many people in your life who you can describe as truly genuine. Pat's energy, determination, spirit, and fundamental love of young children drove Frank Porter Graham for decades. For him, children always came first. He was a kind and gentle person who is greatly missed but never forgotten. Although I have never forgiven him for refusing to give me one of his iconic ties. Happy anniversary, Frank Porter Graham. Thank you for all you have done and will do in the future.
Thank you, Larry. We're grateful for your leadership. And you know, everyone seems to have a personal story of what brought them into this work. We want to say thank you to Jani Kozlowski for doing our keynote today. We're glad you found your home here at FPG with us. Thank you for sharing your inspirational story about your family and Ricky's success and achievement through inclusion, and for reminding us that together we have this mighty fleet of small boats. Thank you to our panelists, to Ching and Rhodus and Sherri and Katy, for sharing your inspirational, your transformative work that you're doing in STEM and practice change and professional development and equity, which really sets the stage for where we're going. We look forward to seeing you all next week on October 14th for our final celebration of 50 years of excellence in technical assistance here at FPG. Our keynote speaker is going to be Dr. Sina Skelton, who's going to continue our conversation about equity, and our panel is going to talk more about using technical assistance to achieve racial equity in early childhood systems. Thank you all for joining us today. We're going to close off with some more remembrances, so stay on, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Great question. We are in unprecedented times, and we know that teachers and providers face challenges to successfully serve preschool children, including young children with disabilities. There is no one strategy to guide how we engage children. Instead, we need to draw on existing evidence-based practices to engage young children and ensure equity and inclusion for preschool children with disabilities. To that end, I'd like to highlight two practices. First, it's critical to connect with families during this time to understand their preferences, their strengths and needs, and to make services accessible and appropriate to match the desires they have for their children. Be sure to explore the family's technology capabilities and explore resources and supports for increasing access to technology if needed. Be sure to recognize the current family context and the emotional and cognitive load that many families are undertaking during this time. Second, commit to designing virtual learning activities that engage participation. Think about children with disabilities when you develop activity.
OSEP has designated the ECTA Center as the national hub for information and resources specific to IDEA early childhood programs during the COVID-19 pandemic. In response, we have gathered resources from across TA centers, federal agencies, and states, and created topical sections on COVID-19 and remote service delivery and distance learning to our website. These icons expand additional pages underneath a topic. Families can find useful information on supporting their child's learning and development at home across both topics. Some key items from our family resources include this practice guide on encouraging child learning and early activities, a module supporting learning during COVID-19 from the IRIS Center, and tip sheets on supporting social emotional development from NCPMI. Under the COVID-19 page, parents can find information on talking to children about the virus and coping with change. Moving to providers and educators, our page on the use of technology helps practitioners and educators engage and prepare families for remote service delivery and distance learning. It includes presentations from the Peel Center and NCPMI, video illustrations of remote home visits using family-guided routines and family coaching, and online modules from the National Center for Hearing Assessment and Management. We've compiled a list of frequently asked questions regarding the delivery of IDEA early childhood services during COVID-19.
I think being a Part C coordinator, it's been really helpful for me to be able to tell my team, you know what? Call ECTA. They'll help you find the right person. So they also know that having relationships with our job-alike peers is critical. I think they were doing these leadership meetings before it became a big OSEP mega meeting. And that was really nice. Same thing with the data meetings and the SPPA PR meetings. And there was just a lot of those. And that really helped us to feel confident that we at least knew a couple of other people who were doing what we were doing. And then you could pick up the phone and call them. And if you didn't know who to call, you'd call ECTA and they'd refer you to one of your job-alike peers. And so that's been really helpful.